Welcome to Blackstone Book Talks, a podcast featuring exclusive interviews from Blackstone's bookish network of authors, narrators, and special guests.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Man-Made Monsters in Fiction, our latest Blackstone Book Talks panel. My name is Bella Bedoya, and I'm thrilled to be introducing two Blackstone authors who are going to be leading today's virtual panel. Cadwell Turnbull, author of No Gods, No Monsters, and Misha Lazzara, author of Manmade Constellations. Named the best book of 2021 and paperback row pick by the New York Times, No Gods, No Monsters by Cadwell Turnbull interrogates the ideas of monsterdom through complex themes of intersectionality, solidarity movements, hierarchy, and societal taboos. Recently ringing in a paperback format launch on September 6th and one-year book birthday on September 7th, the Lammy Award-winning speculative fiction novel has since earned the title of September's Indie Next Pick by the American Booksellers Association and a Best Book Placement by NPR, the New York Public Library, Audible, Book Riot, Library Journal, Kirkus, and more. Praised for its pitch-perfect dialogue by the New York Times bestselling author Jill McCorkle, Manmade Constellations by Misha Lazzara is a structurally inventive and deeply immersive modern-day love story that explores the societal challenges and monstrous heartaches we must confront in order to charter one's own course forward. Recently ringing in her literary fiction debut on August 9th, the title has been deemed a notable debut from a new voice that readers will enjoy by Publishers Weekly and is officially 1 month old today. Welcome, Cadwell, and welcome, Misha. First off, I want to congratulate you both on your recent paperback format launches and your pub day anniversaries. A fun fact that our readers may not know is that Cadwell was actually Misha's professor during her time attending the MFA program at North Carolina State University. It's so exciting to have you guys here. And I know it's been a long time coming, and I'm really excited to see these conversations on how you elaborate through your novels to discuss the human experience, the magic and the monstrosities behind it. So guys, in your opinion, what do you feel makes a man-made monster? And how did you choose to employ these forms of characters as a way of paralleling the real life experiences?
Well, in my book, No Gods, No Monsters, there are literal monsters. There's werewolves, vampires, which is, I think, there's people that I know are vampires, but I don't think I spoiled that in the book. But there's also human beings, and they have, they've just found out that the monsters from their nightmares, from their folklore, from popular culture are real. And they have, varying responses to it. And some of those responses are monstrous. And so, a big part of the book, or a big theme of the book, is trying to explore what makes a monster beyond, that label. So you have, monsters, actual monsters behaving more humanely than human beings in some cases. And so, a big, part of this that I think is really important to highlight is that it's in the actions that these people, these monsters make that decide whether or not they're truly monsters. And, even though that's a huge factor, I also think it's really important to kind of highlight some of the reasons why people might do these things and give some nuance to that question as well. So monsters will, I have characters, human beings and monsters both, that kind of move around on that spectrum. They start out in one place and they end in another place. They start out making bad decisions and then they make good ones, and vice versa. And so in my mind, that's, it's both that kind of fantastical sense of monster, but also that human sense of monster. What do we do, and how do we take responsibility for the actions that we make?
Yeah. You finish in a spot that I can pick up from, because I don't have literal monsters in my story, but each character pretty much in their own turn falls on that spectrum somewhere, like you said. And it's the choices, and how much responsibility you're willing to take for yourself versus the legacy of trauma or the legacy of pain that's been burdened on you that forces you potentially to limit your choices even. And so I think what makes a man-made monster in my story, and maybe, in all stories, is the ego and the fear and the trauma that's informing how you respond to the world. And so I think there is that balance between a sense of responsibility for a character's behavior and how they show up in the world, and also the limitations that have been placed on them by society or their family, and their past. So I think that's how it relates.
Yeah, I also found, you did a really good job in the novel of having characters start off in one place and being kind of run by the trauma that they experienced or their interpretation of the trauma, right? And then they go on a journey, they're challenged by the people around them in really important ways. So community is a big part of the story. And then they come to new understandings about both what the cause of the trauma is. I'm trying to say things without spoiling. And how they could take responsibility for themselves within that context. So even though things are, bad, oftentimes not as bad as they think, they still have to take responsibility for their own actions in the face of like the misfortune that has happened to them in their past. I think that the relationship between the protagonist and John is really an example of this, right? They find each other and they both have, difficult pasts. And then they have to, one made one decision about it and is, I think, a quite remarkable person. And the other one, also a remarkable person, has, a knee-jerk defensive reaction to that trauma. And then they find ways to challenge each other over the course of the novel, which I think was really beautifully done.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think it's an interesting parallel to some of their traumas, Jason's trauma, and in the parent wound. And Rebecca certainly seems like that's a very important motivating fact, both like a limitation potentially, but also it turns into, and I don't want to spoil anything, like a very, like an imperative motivating factor to some of her decisions, that we don't know the outcome of those yet, pertaining to her mother and potentially Laina. And so I guess maybe I was curious about your, how monstrous that parent wound makes someone versus how it directs their choices. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is what's interesting about storytelling generally, right? So it's what has happened to a person, but also the kind of person they are.
Yeah.
And Rebecca is a favorite of mine, but her personality makes it so that when things happen to her, she kind of lashes out, at the people around her, in sometimes hurtful ways, and that she has like this really important growth arc. By the time of the events of the novel, she's become this kind of parental figure to the people around her. She's like very nurturing, but it took her a while to get there. Laina, I think that her response and what's changed for her throughout the novel is that she's internalized a lot of these traumatic events and to some respect buried them. And so she doesn't, these things start coming out in unexpected ways. Like there's a scene where she's at a funeral and she reacts, and it's kind of an out of body experience for her because there's all of this like stuff just, pushed down that's kind of, raging to the surface. And I think that, it was important to show both of those things where you have someone that has constantly, allowed themselves to unleash the emotions that they've had inside. And that's a good part of her personality that she's then implementing in her nurturing role. And someone that has, buried those parts of it, her personality or those feelings that she had, which I relate to, and then having those things explode in ways that, are unexpected.
I loved that chapter where there's so much tension in Laina just getting ready for the birthday party and like trying to get pizza and I just thought that whole time, I listened to it twice. And so that whole time I was like, you sense that internal, like the well is filling and it's full and it's about to overflow. And and this isn't really a question. I just wanted to say, I loved that the way that you demonstrated that so well.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was an important day for her, but I think it's also especially because, and this isn't particularly highlighted in the novel per se, but like during that period of time, the year before, she had lost her brother. And so Ridley her husband, kind of took a back seat during that time. And so she's trying to make up for some of that. And then also she just, wants things to be okay. There's a lot of things that she's carrying that she's chosen to carry in a certain way. And she's trying to make everything right. And, I think it's a, kind of like epiphany moment for her that these things are not going to be right anymore, that she has to face the fact that they're not going to be right. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
We both have like interestingly characters that are hoarders. What made you where did that come from for you? Like, what made that decision for that character?
I think it was the trauma response, to the unexpected loss of her husband, that you just don't want to let anything go ever again. And so I think it was that experience. That Christmas tree from that event never came down. The newspapers were collected to remind of him. And so I just felt right that she was living in kind of a shrine. But what about for you?
It's similar. Yeah. And they're both mothers. They both lost their husbands in ways that, are tragic for them, that they, and then there's this kind of sense of guilt and responsibility. I do think that, she's motivated by that same desire to like, kind of like keep everything close, not release things. And I think that, quietly in the background of the story, she's coming to a moment where she's trying to release these things for herself. And I'm working on the second book right now, and she's in like a much better place, which is really nice to explore. That you have these like kind of auxiliary characters that also go through their own arcs. I think it's very, very similar. I was kind of like, I noticed that particular moment when they went into the house, and I was like, wow, this is cool, like synchronicity or something, or serendipity.
Yeah, that is interesting. I remember that. That chapter was really, really cool because I didn't expect that to happen, or the bones, the story, that story, that part of the story. Speaking of your auxiliary characters, I have because I listened to it, I had to make a list of the characters' names. I was like, I don't want to, there's so many characters because you're doing the trilogy and there's a whole world, it's not like literary fiction in the sense that people understand necessarily the world they're in. It's framed in the literary fiction world because it's a magic that's undiscovered or is only recently revealed. But I think because you have to create your whole world. I mean, obviously you would know more about it than I do, but it seems like you have to do that extra storytelling to populate it. Do you find that to be true?
I think that's part of it. I think there's also like a particular project that I have, when I'm thinking about this kind of fiction. And I think that even if I was writing something that was strictly literary, I would do it similarly. Okay. There's just not as much, like if I had, interestingly enough, and I've heard people, mention that they wanted to they thought they should have, after reading it or getting halfway through it, taken notes and written down characters so that they could remember who they are. Interestingly enough, I get this, the comment that there's too many characters more with no gods, no monsters than in my debut, The Lesson, even though in The Lesson, there's way more POVs. I think part of that is that No Gods, No Monsters has this extra challenge of doing what you mentioned, all of this world building. It's set in different places, in time, even dimension, if you want to think about it that way. And so there's a lot more work to be done. They're a lot more loosely connected. I feel like all the characters in The Lesson kind of inhabit the same space together. But I think that even if I was writing a literary novel, I might have written it, with, several different POVs. And I think part of that is like that community aspect. Like I'm really interested in how groups of people, not just individuals, change the environment around them, how communities change and how they change through this kind of like network effect or this kind of like intersecting prerogatives, that creates this new reality that none of them expects, but it's through all of their individual actions that they get there. And so that's part of it. I think that you're right. You're absolutely right that with spec, I'm trying to introduce other things as well. So there's like secret societies in there, and I'm like throwing quantum mechanics, and there's bee analogies, and there's the monster world, and then the quiet god world behind that, like kind of moving things around, and because it's a trilogy, and I decided it would be a trilogy once I mapped it out. I was like, this is too much for one book. There's a lot of things you have to set up, and some of those things you don't pay off until book 3, so it's, I think that it's a challenge, but I hope that, most people stick with it. I found it really interesting that we got Jason POV chapters, and that there's this whole arc for him about accepting this new thing, again, trying not to spoil, that's happening in his life. And then, this kind of conclusion of his past life that doesn't end the way that we expect. And I wonder, what's the connection between like Jason's POV and Lo's POV? Like, what made you make that choice? Because it's a very interesting choice, and it's beautiful. It works.
Yeah, I think part of it was tension building, because I wanted people to see their paths moving towards each other. But it also felt wrong to send Lo after him and to give Blanche's version of the story without Jason's presenting his own version of that history. And I think the small town connection, I grew up in a really small town, very similar to that one. And so just that kind of the weaving together of those lives, and how Jason's life seemed to be thrown off kilter by Jerry, Lo's dad's, kind of his decisions that it was important to me to kind of show that fuller picture and of the small town, of the setting. And I think that they had a lot in common in the end in what they had to, Lo and Jason, in ways that would foil each other meaningfully in kind of that coming of age, late stage coming of age. If that, I don't know. I mean, how do you come up with your POVs? Because you have a lot too, and you had a lot in the lesson, which I loved. And I was thinking about us talking today, because after I finished the lesson, I was messaging you furiously, making you tell me answers. And so I was glad we got to talk today. But it's the same. It's like, I guess the question could be, offered to you as well. Like, how do you choose, like why Rebecca and not Sarah, who was Lincoln's partner, and why do you choose who you choose?
That is a very good question. I do want to say that what I really appreciate about that 2 POV choice that you made is that they do have that foiling, and there is some like past connections that they have as well. But a lot of the ways that they're foils for each other aren't immediately obvious. There's a lot of nuance and subtlety in the ways that they connect, and I think that the way you handle that was very smart. Just more gushing about, just really digging. And then all of Jason's sections are just so beautifully written, and, the landscape comes into it in such a strong way. To answer your question, most of it, to be honest, is pretty organic. I feel these things out, with the lesson in particular, I just got curious about different people and then explored them. With No Gods, it was more intentional, but the way that people interacted and, kind of bounced off each other was kind of stuff that I discovered in a moment. Like, I didn't know Sarah and Lincoln had a history until like the scene started to tell me that, something was there. And then I would just listen to it and feel it out. And then I would try it out and see what happens. And I do this a lot. And sometimes I decide against the thing, even though it makes sense and it feels right, just because I'm like, now I'm just having too much fun. Now I'm just like doing the conspiracy board thing. And so I'll pull back sometimes, but oftentimes if it feels right, I'll look at it. I'll like lift up the rock or lift the leaf and investigate it a bit. And Sarah and Lincoln's relationship came out of that. Okay. I kind of knew that Rebecca wasn't, like a love interest for Lincoln,
Yeah.
that they had a friendship, but I also didn't know that Lincoln had any significant other when I first started working on it. I think it was kind of like it highlighted that someone else was going through, so close to Laina, a similar kind of pain
Yep.
and sense of responsibility. But it's like that mirroring is happening underneath the things
Yeah.
that are happening, in the foreground. I just like that. I like that idea of having, layers of things. Like if I wanted to, I could write a Sarah story,
Yeah.
and tell that story and have a whole arc for her and explore all the ways that her particular emotional states or her thematic explorations intersect with Laina and other characters in the story.
Yeah, I would say it brought a necessary weight to her character. And without spoilers, just considering her arc, I felt like, oh, I know suddenly in that statement knew so much more about what she was doing there. Not that I didn't already know, but like it was more of an impact and like a solid when, when things play out. So I felt like that. I was like, oh, yeah, that works.
Appreciate
So,
that.
yeah,
I
I will
want to
say
ask
also.
you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say also about Jason, though, the thing was because I initially thought it was going to happen differently, their meeting, I didn't. I still had his sections where they were very short, like vignettes. But when the story like didn't play out how I had planned, because it didn't want to go in that direction, then I knew I needed more of his story because we weren't going to get it in the way that I initially thought, without giving anything away. Or
Right.
so, yeah. So I think that you kind of work with the reality of the world.
No, for sure. For sure. I think that, the urge is to kind of pretend like everything, like that, like you're like this grandmaster that's orchestrated all of it. But so much of it is kind of like some kind of subconscious play where you just discover, oh, this is a thing that needs to be there. And you didn't know it before, like this story needs to be told this way. This needs to, take more time. And you kind of, there's an intuitive sense you develop when you're doing this kind of crafting that I think is really cool. We have a question. Sorry, go ahead.
I know. I see the question. I have one
Yeah.
more question about what you just said. Do you think it's subconscious or do you think it's ethereal?
Oh, what a big, whoa. Yeah, plane just decided to fly by when you asked this question. I mean, if I'm being real, I very much believe, and you've read the books, I believe that there's a lot about the way the world works and the way the universe works that we don't understand. And to me, I have a very agnostic view of it. Like I like to not have my mind made up, like, so I have this kind of like, oh, it's this kind of something that's boiling from beneath, or from the well of my mind. And then I also believe that there's this kind of like, I don't know, like that events have like waves that like, that branch out from those events and they have effects on things, there's this kind of invisible like web that that sometimes you'll pull and you'll access. And I don't know if that makes any sense. But to me, there is some, I sound really woo-woo, but something's very supernatural. I can't explain it. When a thing just makes sense, it makes sense. And it doesn't always feel like it's coming from in me, but I kind of like, on one hand, I'm like, it's coming from elsewhere. And then I'm like, maybe it's coming from within me and I just don't know. But that's the beauty, right? Like there's so much about even how my own brain works that I don't understand. What about you? Like, how do you think, where does it come from?
I mean, I agree with everything you said. It's crazy how it works. If it's subconscious, it's crazy how there's probably no chronological time when it comes to writing a book, because I think for example, the one I'm writing now, she fell and hit her head. I'm not giving away too much, but she fell and hit her head and it was bleeding, and she's newly pregnant and doesn't want to be. And so this is in the Depression era. And so she goes in the church, the woman at the church is a friend, and the woman uses like a menstrual cloth to stop the bleeding. And I didn't even think about it at the time. That's just what a woman would use back then, if they have they don't have the bandages they need. And so she goes home and she throws it in the garbage, and then her husband walks in and I'm writing it and he sees it. And I'm like, that's it, that's her out. And I had not planned it, and it wasn't anything that I had thought through. It just happened. And I was like, I couldn't have thought of it better. I couldn't have. And so she, he sees it and he says, oh, you lost the baby. And she's like, I lost the baby, and that's what she had wanted to happen. And so, my book won't be out for like a long time, so everyone will forget this if they want to read it. But so anyway, like those kinds of things that happen in storytelling blow my mind in a way that I don't think I could have even planned it. My own brain.
I love when that happens.
Doesn't answer the question though, but no one knows. So I'll ask the first one and then we'll get to it though.
Okay.
Was it challenging to write the POVs of characters whose identities were yours? Did you have an idea of what each character's journey would be like, or did that evolve during the process? You have a lot of POVs and who are different than yours. So you start.
Yeah, I think that we've just been talking about this a bit. Like, I feel like it's a good branching off point. No, I tend to have like one or two defining characteristics of a person first, and then it's just kind of like, I don't know, you're using a lot of metaphors here, but like, you like unearthing the rest of that person. And I think that the whole person comes into focus when you build on those like primary things and you add other things and contradictory things, and you create a person that's a contradiction, right? So they have things that like speak to themes that I'm interested in, and they tend to start that way. I'm like, oh, I want to explore faith. And then I'll have a character who's struggling with faith, or and I'll have a foil character who, instead of walking away from their faith, like becomes more entrenched in their faith. It happens in the lesson. And then there's all of this constellation of things that start coming as I start working on the character that are not related to that thing, or is a contradiction to that thing, or adds like another layer to that thing. Like there's a character that comes across very rigid throughout the whole of the book, the lesson again. And but when you see her perspective, her POV section, you find out that there's so much depth and so much going on, and that it's like a very courageous decision for her to be that kind of person. And I think that stuff is just a discovery. Like I have no idea where it comes from. It when it arrives, it feels right.
Yeah.
Like there's always like a thing, you're thinking about a character, a thing about them reveals itself. It comes on a page or it comes up in your head, and you know which ones to keep. You just know this is true for that person. And then, sometimes you have to work things on a revision, but I think like 80-90% of it is just like that feeling of, yeah, this is right. What about you?
Yeah, I got the Alex Tremblador, who wrote Half Out Loud, and we had a Blackstone book talk, and we had a similar question about identities. And a similar thing was there are reasons, of course, there are always reasons that you have a character, like you said, for what the role in the story is. But first, I feel like it starts out that's who they are for me. Like that's who they are, and that's what they look like, and that's where they came from. And it's such a knowing that it's like the story was finished before it started, as far as that character's identity, I guess. And yeah, and so with Jason, it was just who he was. And John is like a cult snake church man. It's just who he was. I'm also fascinated by those, and go visit them in Marshall. But so I think it's just you have to trust that it has to be who they are, and that's who they are as a person. And then you write it, and everyone is full of contradictions, and that's what makes them relatable, because a character who was not contradictory would be a robot, or the kitty god, maybe the kitty god doesn't have any contradictions in your book.
Oh no, tons of contradictions.
Okay.
I want to say one more thing. Like I think that it is true, and I'm going to admit it, that all of the characters in my books have a bit of me in them. But what makes them themselves is all the things that are not me, you know? So like it's there's always a little bit of me. Like the way that I can access the character is that there's a facet, there's a thing that they're thinking about or feeling or experiencing that I can also feel, you know, like like a character dealing with a particular trauma, I can relate to it, or a character having like an existential crisis, I can relate to that. A character deciding to be more entrenched in their belief system, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Or walking away from belief, I can relate to that. I guess some of this stuff is universal, but I think that the way that I connect with them is very specific. It's like like a conversation where we're not necessarily talking to each other, but where I'm feeling them out through my own experience. And then all of this other stuff is just them. You know, it's things that I discover about them as I work on the project.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, I feel like we should get to the next question. But I mean, if I was in your class, I would have more questions about that for sure, because it's just really interesting, and it's also a matter of you keeping so many characters contained in your, in your book, in your mind, but on the page too, and that's really interesting to populate so many. Because we could talk about the mosaic form, but first, I will ask this question to you, Cadwell. I really loved your take on marginalized visibility when it came to the fracture. Was this used as a method of showing how our present day society is truly the fractured one? And how did the name come about?
Yeah, I think that the short answer to this is yes. I do think that's how we are right now. When I was thinking about it, I originally had it that, in early versions, that there was much more of an acceptance once, the revelation came about that this was real, but then, I was thinking a lot about it. And, I was even thinking about the fact that, we have tons of like footage of UFOs or footage of, all kinds of strange things, phenomena. And we don't really believe anything. We kind of have like a half belief. It's like, oh, that's interesting. That could be something. Maybe it's a hoax, and I was like, okay, it feels more realistic that with video evidence. And I was thinking about also like flat earthers and, people that believe that the moon landing was fake, that kind of thing. Where things that we kind of, accept as truth, people will also doubt because it doesn't match their experience. So they don't have evidence in their hands that they can say that this is verifiably true. You'd have to put some people on the moon before they're like, the moon landing is real,
moon is made of cheese.
Right. And so I was like, yeah, there's gonna be a split. And because of something so big and and so strange, there has to be a split. There's some people that just can't put that into they can't make that a part of their new reality because it would break them. It's the kind of thing that is like so heavy, so disturbing that people have to create distance. And I thought people will have trouble believing this. I would have to explain it a lot. But then, as I was working on it, the pandemic happened, and I feel like, it was like, it did most of the work for me. Like I could just be like, yeah, that's how we respond. Look, that's how we respond. And so, yeah, it was very much intentional. The references when it started out wasn't what you might expect, but like, as I started working on it and got deeper into it, it became more, things that I could point to just directly, and most people would be able to understand where I'm coming from. There's also this like, being from a marginalized perspective and knowing that, for people of color, for Black people, there's things that we would readily accept as true that we would have to argue and justify to, the dominant culture. It's like these things are true, like police brutality. I had a moment when I was in grad school where there was just a string of them. And at the time, I don't know why, I was on Facebook, having conversations with people, trying to, like, maybe if I reason and explain, people will get it. But the video would be right there. I'd be explaining, other people would come into the, into those threads and talk about it. We would have like article wars where I'll be bringing in links and, and it was interesting to see how cemented some people were in this kind of like, this can't possibly be real, and, the reasons why they might do that. And so I was interested in like, thinking about people's reasons why they would believe or why they wouldn't believe, and how that is, very human, very understandable, but has like very, terrible, heartbreaking effects.
Yeah, interesting. That makes me think of Ridley at that point in the story when he is kind of fighting Sarah at his birthday party, and he feels maybe like he's failing or letting people down, but he's also so afraid because of what he saw. And I thought that was really interesting because it was like a vulnerable moment for him in having to weigh options of security versus accountability, I guess.
Right. Like, I don't think, my personal opinion on the matter is that Ridley isn't wrong for being afraid the way that he is, like, and making the kind of decision that he's making. It's to me, it's the most reasonable decision given the things that he's experienced.
Well, then he's justified.
Right. Yeah. And Sarah is like challenging him on it, and for her reasons, and she's very justified in the reasons that she's challenging him. And he comes to an understanding within himself, but it's not for Sarah's reasons, it's for his own reasons. Yeah. And I thought that was, important. Like, I definitely wasn't trying to say that he was wrong. I would, in that case, be completely terrified and make a very similar decision. That's how I related to him as a person, because, and this is the true thing, like the intersectionality of the monsters and the other parts of the identity is important, because the monsters aren't all great.
Right.
They're dangerous.
Some of them are, yeah.
And that's because of other intersections of their identity. Like, it's some monsters are vulnerable, and some monsters are causing harm for their own reasons. Try to humanize all of that stuff, but I think that it's it might be too easy to map these things to like one-to-one. It's the equation is a little bit more complicated. So Ridley's navigating, okay, I can be afraid of certain aspects of this monster world, and but I can also be there for monsters that I know and I care about, are vulnerable monsters, marginalized monsters, and do advocacy in the same way you would do for human beings. Like that's how he gets there. He's like, they're humans, so like some humans are going to be, you're going to have to fight against, and some humans you're going to have to support and and take care of and show solidarity with. And so, like, expanding his view of who his people is helps him to at least deal with that fear that he has. There's a question for you, so okay. I'm gonna it's from Ava. It seems like the biggest monsters in your novel are the ones we fight internally. I'm really curious to hear more about how you created the stances on freegans and anti-capitalism. Oh, this is great.
Yeah, I would agree with Ava for sure that it's the kind of human versus self setup, I guess, as far as conflicts go. But I think that it's the ones we fight internally, but in a lot of their cases, they are a legacy or a birthright that they are born into, that they have to eventually, like, kind of like they're trying to stop that cycle or not pass on that pain if possible. It's especially important for Jason because of what he's deciding to take on, at the end of the novel. And so it's the idea that it's making that pain and those traumas conscious, so that we can, like you said, not be directed by them, but directed by what we really want for ourselves and for the world and our community. And speaking of community, I think partially the environmentalism and the freeganism and anti-capitalism in my novel is just a natural take on the state of the world, and it seems like something that's on Lo's mind, and certainly on Jason's, because of where he is, what he's chosen to do in his life. And if there's one way that Jason and I are definitely connected, it's that I want to live in a yurt and work in an organic farm. And so, but I think that beyond that, there is that level of Lo's, both of their self-righteousness that they use as a shield to put up walls. And I think everyone does that with their beliefs and values, as valid as they are, as important as they are. If you're using it as a weapon, then it's not going to help anyone in the end. And Lo comes to realize that a little bit in the end, and Jason too, that like what we are valuing and what we are calling our values, even if they're valid and important, can still cause us harm if we're not aware of how we're using them and how we're judging with them. And so I think it was both the inevitable kind of existential dread that both characters are feeling because of the world that we live in, versus how they're using those what seem like obvious beliefs to bash people over the head with them.
I love that. Like, reading through, the novel, I agree with Lo.
Yeah.
Almost all the time. Like, I'm like, yep, that's right. That's right. That's right. But there's this like kind of like, thing that she comes to realize is, and it's through, just forming a deeper relationship with people around her.
Yeah.
That, she might be right, but she's also like using it as a shield, as you said. And that, I'm trying to remember the line. She was like, she said something like, she doesn't have to change who she is, but she doesn't have to change him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I think that was just a, beautiful encapsulation of that, like, that revelation, that coming to that moment of like self-growth, where it's just like, yeah, that you're not going to meet anyone in your life that's going to follow to a T all the things you might want, that fits all of the things in your belief system, ideology. But that's part of the joy of it. That's part of building a meaningful relationship with another human being.
Yeah. And I feel like if the scope is so narrow of like what is right and what needs to be done, then you really miss the whole periphery of, of all the other options and opportunities. And so John is talking about hunting, and he's talking about dehydrating meat and fishing and storing it in his cooler and all these things that are really good for the, avoiding big farms and, and like kind of buying factory meat or whatever. And she's just like, doesn't care, doesn't matter.
Right.
And so,
overlooking it.
Yeah, it's so easy to get blinders on in anything that we value. Anything, we could value adventure and then like throw our whole life away because that's our value. It could be any values that we have. But I guess that makes me think of Rebecca too, because when you're the alpha female, or when you're in charge, and then it's not like a democratically elected position. I don't know. I guess I don't remember how she got it, but it felt like a real role, but then it crumbled. And I don't know that we got a ton. It was maybe because of Lincoln's death, but I'm curious if we're going to get more about the wolf pack in the second book.
Yeah, no, there's like, I don't think this is a particular spoiler. There's like a whole, like the wolf pack is a POV in the second book. Like I'm like kind of like moving from like individual POVs to kind of like collective POVs.
That's natural.
Yeah. I'm trying to like lead, because it's going to lead to an even further like larger POV, and so it's challenging. And because they're a wolf pack, they're the closest, there's also like a degree of separation across like these group POVs. Some group POVs are tighter knit, some are looser. And it's something that I want to explore, because the dynamic isn't that she, some magical reason she's become an alpha. She's not really one. She just assumes that role because of her human personality. I think she's just like within that circle, a leader,
Yeah.
and it's something that comes out of just the dynamics and relationships between all of the people. And in the new circle, she's, going to have it's going to change. She's not. It's like a more equal distribution. So and I'm playing around with the trope, right? So like in wolf packs, in most urban fantasy stories, there's like a lead wolf.
Yeah.
And there's all of this like dynamics of like who gets to be the lead and who's the second and all that stuff. And I thought, well, what if you brought like collectivism to the wolf pack? And so there's going to be like a more collectivist view of being a wolf in the next book, that you're going to see more directly, because by the time of No Gods, that whole pack has been kind of dissolved. So I want to, I'm trying to say things without spoiling things. I want to take this new one and kind of go deeper and show like what the dynamics would be. We got another question.
Excited. Okay. Wait, for a second, I have to ask one more spoiler real quick. What about the cat god? Because that's definitely my favorite character.
Oh, for real?
Yes.
This is the first time I've heard this. I don't. That's well. I want to say that's one of my favorite characters still, because she has a very long history in my own mind.
What? So do we get some of it?
We get some of it. We get some of it in book 2. We get a lot more of it in book 3.
Okay.
So there's some waiting
full arc.
involved.
I want that full arc for the cat god. Yeah.
Yeah, she's very, very, very interesting, and her backstory is very interesting and important.
She can speak to your mind. She seems pretty violent.
Yeah, I'll say this and hope it's not a spoiler. I don't know if she's necessarily violent. She's just extremely powerful. And so like there's this kind of like, if you recognize, and even the way that she carries herself, she's in the form of a little like cat, little black cat. But you immediately recognize, if you're around her, that this is a significant being. And then if you know who she is, like Damsel, knows who she is, she's like, be careful, like, it's not that she would, but she has the potential to do, if she wanted to, she could do things you could not imagine, like, I really love that character. I have a lot of fun in my head. Eventually it's going to make it down into story, but thanks for asking about that.
Oh yeah. Well, she's right at the end of the book, or there, I don't know, right at the end of the book. So I'm like, well, obviously something's happening with this kitty. Yeah.
No, she's huge. I wanted to ask you a question before. There's another question for us both, but I'm curious because you do the romance, the central romance so well.
Oh.
How did you approach that kind of like, because it's very much like a, like, before they're able to finally like nestle into something that's like not like completely harmonious. There is, I imagine, like if I project, they're still gonna butt heads, but it's gonna be like in a loving way, like like they'll sometimes have hard moments, but I just felt like you built that relationship so well and so gradually. And I think you did a really good job with just how like attraction kind of like, rewires your own, like, like there's ways that she's resisting him because of her own ideologies, but the attraction kind of like squeezes in there, and it happens really gradually and beautifully. So like, how did you approach that? What was your process with that?
Well, the interesting thing is the first like iteration of this novel was a long time ago, and they were already together, and they were already in a relationship. And so I kind of knew them like that. And so this was kind of their origin story. But I do think that attraction plays just physical attraction plays an important role in, even if it's not just physical attraction, it's that connection that you have with someone and you don't even really know why, but I know it's real because there are certain people that in my own life experience, that you just feel like you've known them forever, or like for some, even if it's platonic, or even if you're already with someone, but there's just someone you meet and you just hit it off right away. And so I think it had to be that kind of moment when they met, and he felt that for sure. And that it's also like his very open attraction that is kind of like a magnet to her, because when someone's very attracted to you or they want to be with you, then that door is always open, and it's really tempting to walk past it over and over again and not go inside. And so I think that was an important factor in that. But I also think that she wanted to be with him the whole time, and if it had been she hadn't had her, I was going to say normal, which is not true, but she hadn't had all that baggage in her past relationships and all the pain, that it probably would have happened much sooner, falling into each other, at least, in bed. But I think that, so I think having that start in my head of them already being together made writing their origin story and what direction they would head in, how they would converge a little easier.
Yeah, you could definitely see that in the very first scene with them together. There's already that chemistry, and it's more than, I like that you said, like, it's, it's more than physical. There's like a way that a person and another person will just have, again, sound very woo. There's just like, an electricity, a vibe that is beyond just a physical vibe. It's the way a person carries themselves, the way a person talks, the way, their perspective, all of those things you can, even immediately when you see someone, they carry it on them. You can just see the things that a person carries on them. And that is like, sometimes against your better judgment, whatever you think that might be, you might find yourself drawn to a person, and those moments create, and it did within the story, like great change within those characters.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I feel that way all the time. I've met a lot of my best friends where it's like that. And I have a lot of friends like that. And with my husband, we were married like within 4 months. And so because there was no attempting to avoid the open door, if you meet someone like that, I feel like you can just walk in. And so I know that those relationships, those feelings exist in the world. So I think taking that with me.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, with me and my wife, it was kind of like a friends for that like a long on ramp. Like, but I think but I like from very early on, I was like, but things, it's very similar, like you meet someone, and sometimes it's not always best time, but that I'd even moved away. There's just ways that like if you're drawn to particular relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, there's like a pulling effect. I think it's really cool. I think that you do a really good job of exploring that within the story.
Thank you. There's more relationships in my next novels, in with those vibes when you connect with someone right away, and it feels almost like a twin soul. And I don't know that I believe in, I don't like woo-woo stuff, but I know that I've had friends and my husband and other people in my life that feel that way. And I feel like that's a cosmic question worth exploring.
Right.
So we have 2 questions now. So I'll ask the first one. Would you echo that your novels use calamity for Cadwell and childhood trauma for Misha as a means of collectivism?
Yeah, it's definitely the characters, and that continues to be true within the next 2 books, that there's, moments of calamity that bring people together in surprising ways. There's, by the end of No Gods, there's like groups of people that have found each other that would not be in the same room with each other otherwise. It's like, and I think that this, in the book, it's significant climactic events that are traumatic, but I feel like that is true in life, that you just find yourself in rooms with people that you normally wouldn't be in, and the situation brings you into that room. And it might not be that same immediate spark like we were just talking about, but like over time, you develop just sharing that same space, like an understanding of that other individual. And so, yeah, I think that within the novel, within the series, there's these big moments, these big events that are kind of like lightning rods or magnets that pulls people together. I think childhood trauma is also a thing that, connects people within the story as well. But what about you?
Well, it's
How does it work?
interesting because I don't know that I would say that there are means to collectivism, because I feel like in Man-Made Constellations, they have to overcome their pain to come together. And in that way, I feel that community is almost like an act of intention that requires healing to create healing. But I certainly think that like making our pain conscious and not letting it drive us, and sharing it even to feel connected as they do several times is positive and helps create a community where people feel seen and healthier just by like unearthing, like you said, what we keep hidden.
Oh, that's a very good answer. Yeah, I feel that. I'll ask the next one.
I can't wait to start.
Can you elaborate on the work you'll be publishing together?
That's really good.
Yeah. Do you want to start?
Well, I'll say that it is definitely mosaic, a lot of found materials, definitely interrupted timelines of a story of a North Carolina town that is kind of a dystopian historical work. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's a lot of things at once, right? Yeah, and this actually, you were a student at MFA when my first year teaching at NC State, and I wanted to do this collaborative project, and I thought a mosaic narrative would be a good way to do something collaboratively, and it was definitely meant to just be like an exercise in looking at all of the components of a story, and then I was just blown away by what y'all came up with, and it was one of those things where I was just like, well, I have to at least try, to do something with this. It's brilliant. I'm like trying to talk about this without even like giving away the premise, because the premise is so cool.
I know it is.
But it's about an undiscovered town. There's a speculative element, but it's really about like, there's a lot of human stories there. Y'all, the group, it was,
and
I was involved.
Too. Yeah.
Too. And the students, and just came up with these really inventive ways of telling the story. Like it wasn't all straight or direct. Some of it was, plays. Some of it was like a progress report, like
math formulas,
newspaper articles, essays, all of these things that just came together and created this like really just rich narrative. And it was just fun to do. And, until it happened, I wasn't sure like it could work. But it really works, and it's kind of like a bug now. Like I keep looking for, opportunities to do kind of collaborative work, because it's like, oh, it's so much better than just doing a thing by yourself. And it brings out things that you wouldn't do on your own.
Well, and for so long, television writing has been a whole room full of collaborators, and fiction hasn't really caught up, even though behind the scenes, we know there are a lot of hands on a piece of work, especially if you're in an MFA program. But even not, at the publishing house and with your editors and copy editors. And so the kind of the myth of the individual artist is fine, but I think it's really cool to have the different voices and narratives come together and create a world.
Yeah, exactly. As you said, TV and film, when you finish a movie, there's a whole scroll of like all the people that worked on this narrative together, and they all have like small or large impacts. Like the costume designers have impacts on the story.
Yeah.
The extras, the cinematographer, the effects team, all of these things come together to create the story. and it's not just the script. And then oftentimes, and this is true especially in TV, there's multiple people working on a script, and some people are working on one episode and somebody else is working on another. And so it kind of, I felt like this was happening as we were working on it. There was this kind of like group mind that was developing. Like we all kind of understood the assignment, so to speak. And that was really fun to do because was it 13 of us, 12, 13 of us?
Yeah, 12 or 13.
Yeah, that's a lot of people to, coordinate across, but it worked.
Yeah, that was so fun. I can't wait to hold it. I can't wait to read it. I'm going to sell the SHIT out of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't tell you. I guess I'll tell you live. We got the grant.
Oh, yay! Money.
Yeah, so it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
Wow, that was a fast response. Less than a month.
Yeah. They deliberated and they came back and yay, we got what we needed.
Oh, good. Oh, I can't wait. I cannot wait for this one. It's going to be a show that we are going to write on.
Okay.
Not that we're busy or anything.
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
What can the reading writing community do to help foster representative storytelling, especially with uncomfortable truths from intersectional identities and the monsters within our own society? You start for sure.
Okay, Sorry,
I didn't read that great.
No. It's a very like multifaceted question. And I just think, I'm going to have a very basic answer to this. I think just the best thing that we can do is just make more room, and allow many versions of similar stories to be told. So I think that oftentimes, and this happens more so when we're talking about like a marginalized story, we'll say, oh, that's been done before over there in X way, and so we can't do it again. I think that we don't really say that the same way with dominant stories. And I think that we should allow not just one view of a particular place, but many different writers writing about that particular place in their particular point of view, or a particular experience from their particular point of view. And that totality of experience allows for a bigger and sharper picture of the world. It's not one person can encapsulate all of it. Because I think that the way we get to that kind of greater understanding is by listening in a lot of different rooms and allowing, giving people, the opportunity to tell a story. Even if to our first eye it looks like it's something that's been said before, approaching things openly.
Yeah. I always show my students the danger of a single story. Have you seen that TED Talk by Adichie? Yeah. And so then we read Adichie's Bird Song and Jump Will Hear He's Sexy, the same. Have you read those two stories?
No.
Oh, they're so good. So they're both mistress trope stories. They're pretty much the same story. So Adichie took that story and set it in Nigeria. It was very intentional. And I just love that. And she talks about the danger of having a single story. And so I just hear what you're saying. I think it's really cool. I think also just being open to the stories, reading your book and you just don't know what to expect. You don't know what kind of character you're going to meet, human, monster, whatever their backgrounds are. And I love that. I love that, just being open and, in my book, just being open to the idea of freeganism. A lot of people aren't. They're like, right. No, I hate this premise. Sorry. Whatever. But I think for when you get those stories and you're getting of the privilege of hearing them, reading them.
I feel like that response comes from a place of defensive-ness, not throwing shade.
I think so too. Yeah.
Right. You approach that kind of stuff, even if you couldn't live that life exactly the way that Lo does, you can still respect where that's coming from and understand where it's coming from and empathize and in the same way you have relationships with, I think we do this exercises all the time with family. Yeah. You have family members that you would otherwise not,
associate.
Right. But their family, and, there's aspects to that relationship that at least not toxic. So you're like, you maintain that relationship and you come to an understanding and you empathize with a point of view, even if you don't share it. And I think that's, the joy of fiction, right? That lesson sounds really great. The two stories.
Love it. Yeah. Do it at the beginning of every semester. And then one student this year was like, I've watched this TED Talk like in 10 different classes, but I still love it. And I'm like, okay, everyone's catching on. Wasn't the one to come up with this.
But I think the added, like doing taking that conversation and then adding the two narratives and saying, this is the same trope.
Yeah.
But applied differently and see what it does. I think it's super important.
She did it exactly the same. There's like the friend at work. There's like, she did it. I know she did it on purpose and I love it. And I think it's really cool to see them side by side.
Mm-hmm.
This was a lot of fun, guys. Good vibes all around. I've really, really enjoyed this talk and just listening to you both go back and forth and give your perspectives. It was just awesome. Cadwell and Misha, I want to thank you guys for spending your book birthdays with us, diving into these themes of monsterdom and collectivism within your works, within our present day society. I feel like the intersectional crossover elements of your story are so special, and they really leave such a mark on all of our readers. And, getting to hear the backstory of how they came about made that even more special. So I can't echo your statement enough, to know the man-made monster is to acknowledge the uncomfortable truths of our communities and the people that surround them. It definitely takes healing to create healing. And I just really can't wait to see what you guys are going to be coming out with next, the continuation, Cadwell, of your Convergence saga. Can't wait to read your collective works. Congratulations on the grant, by the way. That's awesome.
Yay.
And for those who are tuning in late, we're wrapping up our Blackstone Book Talks panel, Man-Made Monsters in Fiction, led by No Gods, No Monsters author Cadwell Turnbull and Man-Made Constellations author Misha Lazzara. You can learn more about the authors and where to purchase their releases at www.blackstonepublishing.com and follow our events page for the next awesome talk. So thank you guys again, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you all at our next roundtable.
Thanks, Bella. Thanks, Cadwell. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Blackstone Book Talks with Blackstone Publishing. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest bookish news from Blackstone, you can follow us on Instagram at Blackstone Publishing, on Twitter and Facebook at Blackstone Audio, or on our website at blackstonepublishing.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.